From the Cusick Group, securities provided by MoneyBlock. We got a mixed market. We see that the domestic markets here in the United States, the S&Ps, the NASDAQ, as well as the Russell 2000 and the Dow Jones, all mixed right now. And we're seeing similar action in the overnight markets. Taking a look at Asia, markets are closed. The Japanese Nikkei finished unchanged, slightly in the red. There was a little bit of selling forming towards the end of the session. But right now we had modest strength forming or weakness in the yen towards the close. The strength in the dollar continues to pressure, but that makes sense in the currency right now. Strength in the dollar, and basically there was a 10% run up over last week. You see that basically the Nikkei in general and the currency markets are starting to tap the brakes a little bit here. They're trying to digest everything that's going on. The Nikkei coming back right to unchanged, not completely out of the norm. 5 sectors registered losses overnight, with communications leading away down 1.3%, industrials down 0.4%. They were showing some relative weakness, but we did see healthcare in Japan. That sector was to the upside, up 1.1%, and financials continued to hold strong. In front of the yen weakness, up about 0.9%. Suzuki Motors and Sony lost between 1.8% and 6.1%. Those were the most notable laggards. Yokohama Rubber as well as Fuji Heavy Industries were up about 2.1% and 3.9% respectively. Taking a look at the EWJ, that's the ETF that you can monitor. That has all of these Japanese stocks and many more that trade in the Nikkei. Went out last night at 49.50. Right now, the options are pricing in the potential for the stock to move either up or down about 1.6%. The implied volatility in those options right now is at 19.36%. What does that mean to you? The volatility is cheap. That means that there's not a heightened expectation of violent moves in the Japanese ETF, but we'll keep an eye on EWJ. Taking a look at Hong Kong and the Hang Seng, it added about 0.5% overnight. Now, financials are showing relative strength there. Hang Seng Bank, China Life, Construction Bank also gained about 1.1% and 2.3% as I see the closing prices. Taking a look at the ETF that tracks all of these stocks in the Hang Seng, EWH is the ETF, went out last night at 20.59. It's pricing, the options are pricing in the potential for the stock to move either up or down into the end of the week, about 1.8%. Vol is coming in at around 22.5%, which is telling us that there is a little bit of a heightened expectation of potential movement going into next week and the upcoming weeks. We're seeing an uptick in implied volatility in some of the Asian ETFs, specifically here in EWH that's tracking Hong Kong. We're going to watch that very closely. The IV rank is starting to move to the upside over 50%. That's where that heightens our risk monitor. China Shanghai Composite shed about 0.1%. Basically, the action was muted overnight. The market's going to be sitting on its hands right now until tomorrow morning. There's going to be a foreign direct investment data released, and that's going to be a big number. That's going to move the market potentially in China. Weakness in the yuan basically sent it to its lowest level that we've seen in the Chinese currency since 2009. This is going to be a theme that we're going to see against global currencies and the U.S. dollar. They're dropping precipitously against the U.S. dollar. That's going to start to potentially heighten some inflation concerns around the world. Rutan Electric, Yanzhou Coal Mining, and Moyang Commercial all lost between 3.1% and 4%. Now, Asher is the ETF, ASHR, that tracks the 300 stocks that are in the composite. Went out last night at 25.03. Options are pricing in the potential for the stock to move roughly either up or down about 1.9%. And you're looking at implied volatility relatively inexpensive here against the Chinese ETF. So we're going to watch this very closely, especially if we continue to see the fluctuation in the Chinese currency. One thing that is notable about out of Asia is India came back online today. They were closed for a holiday yesterday. India fell about 1.9%. and there was a release from the government that basically said they're under a cash crunch. They had removed some higher valued notes off of the matriculation and curve. So bottom line is that they're under a crash crunch. You saw growth names that were under pressure: Tata Motors, Tata Steel, Asian Paints, Suzuki, and Axis Bank all lost between 3.9% and 9.9% on that headline. You're seeing that the ETF that tracks Indian stocks, EPI, it went out at 1950. They're pricing in the potential for the stock to move either up or down into the end of this week around 3%. Volatility is high. As a matter of fact, you're getting an IV rank at around 86%. Folks, that's telling you that Indian stocks could be getting volatile very soon, especially with the most recent headlines that we've seen coming from the government on the cash crunch. Now turning over to Europe, we take a look at the German DAX. It's lower right now in the session at around down about a tenth of a percent. Deutsche Bank continues to be under pressure, down about 0.9%. And we're also seeing heavyweight names like Merck, Siemens, and SAP all down between 0.7% and 1.4%. We are seeing some upside, though, in some transports. Lufthansa, the most notable one, up 2%. But we're also seeing some mixed action from exporters like BMW, Daimler Chrysler, Volkswagen, all somewhere around flatline to higher by about 0.3%, BMW being the only one that's up right now. EWG is the ETF we want to keep an eye on that tracks German stocks. Went out at 25.24. We're going to see where this thing opens, but it's the options right now are pricing in for the potential for the stock, this ETF, to be up or down for the remainder of this week, roughly around 1.7%. Vol is on the upside. It is getting into that range where we see the IV getting in a rank around 50%. All that's telling us is that there is a heightened expectation of potential moves. They're not exactly violent, but you're going to see some maybe potentially more whippy moves, so we're going to watch that closely. The UK's FTSE is up by about 0.6% right now, showing relative strength amid the fact that the pound actually slid about 0.6%. Right now, the pound against the dollar, the pound is basically at 124.24 against the US dollar. Basically, what has occurred right now is some disappointing CPI data came out for October. The falling pound right now is starting to raise concerns of rising import prices, which then will feed into potentially higher inflation down the road. That's going to be the concern that you're going to see globally, but that's right now what the concern with the move in the pound that's coming out of the British government right now. You're going to hear foreign ministers discuss this a little bit more if we continue to see this slide in global currencies. Consumer names were leading the way in the UK with Morrison Supermarkets, Marks & Spencer, and Carnival all up between 1.6% and 5.2%. We did see, though, in the UK that miners are under pressure. Anglo-American, BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, and Glencore all down about basically 4.3% and 6.8% respectively. EWU is the ETF that tracks stocks in the UK. Went out last night here in the States at 20.96. The options right now are pricing the stock still being able to move around up or down 2% this week. Going into the end of the week, we are seeing that vol is relatively inexpensive, so it doesn't. They're not pricing in the potential for a big violent move. Finally, we're going to take a look at the French CAC, up about 0.2% right now in this session. Growth-sensitive names like Total, TechChip, Michelin, and Capgemini are all up between 1.4% and 2.3%. We are seeing some mixed action, and actually to the downside now in financial. Societe Generale, BNP Paribas, as well as Crédit Agricole, all down between 0.3% and 0.9%. EWQ is the ETF that we're going to follow for these French stocks and more. Went out last night at 23.47. Right now, the options are pricing in for the ETF to potentially trade in a range of either up or down around 1.7%. Implied volatility is on the move. We're starting to see that there is some heightened expectation of potential violent moves in French stocks. We're going to keep an eye on that. Watch EWQ. All right, that's it right now for the overnight action. Stay tuned at 9:30 Eastern Time. We're going to come back. We're going to do What's Hot Now on the Open. Please join us at 9:30 Eastern Time. See you then.